Welcome to Medicaid Monday. On behalf of my partner, Frank Hemming, and myself, we're very happy to be here with you today, bringing some timely and we think vital information on the state of play and consumer-directed personal assistance in New York State. This is our law firm. If you haven't been with us before on one of these webinars or a seminar, it's Pierro, Connor, and Strauss, primarily located in Albany and New York City, with offices around New York State. And we practice estate planning, elder law, special needs planning, and of course, Medicaid, which is today's topic. So we're going to look very quickly at Medicaid numbers. And this is, I think, about our 19th in the series that we've done of Medicaid Mondays on a monthly basis. So we have versions of this covering a whole host of different topics, including all the basics of Medicaid, Medicaid home care. So we're not going to cover that in too much detail today. We want to get into the consumer-directed program, the myths, the facts, the current award that's been announced just recently on September 30th by Governor Hochul, and then what all of the ramifications of that are, subcontractors, and what all of this means to our very vulnerable and very needy clients in New York State who are at risk at home for not being able to find the care that they need to get a safe environment and to stay at home. So Frank, walk us through the Medicaid numbers.
Yeah, so real quick, right, because to get the consumer directed, you have to be on Medicaid. So what does that mean? It means you have to qualify financially, both through your income and your assets. So income numbers are now on your screen, 1752 if you're a single person, 2371 if you're a married couple. You get your spousal allowance of 3853.50, and you get your nursing home allowance of $50. Been these numbers all year. So if you have questions about these, go back further earlier in the series.
And for those that have more income than 1752 or the other numbers of eligibility, that is not a barrier to receiving Medicaid home care. New York is a spend down state. And in fact, we have an ability to contribute income to pooled income trusts to get down to the Medicaid eligibility level, a very important factor. And we do have Medicaid Mondays on our website that do cover the pooled trust.
And then in terms of assets, again, you have to qualify financially. So again, no new numbers for 24 now on the screen. So if you're a single person, it's 31,175. Married couple, where both apply, it's 42,312. Spousal allowance at that 74,820 on the lower end, up to the higher end of 154,140. And again, for more information on these, go check out other webinars.
And the look back period that we just had a session on, talking about what if New York does impose a look back and penalty periods to Medicaid home care. That is something that we don't have a definitive answer on yet. We're waiting to hear when that enactment will happen. Most of you probably know that this law was passed 3 years ago, going on 4 years ago during COVID, and it was put off due to the pandemic. We're waiting for that 2.5-year look back period to be imposed on Medicaid transfers for home care. A whole nother topic. We'll revisit this when we do get real word from the Department of Health. But for now, there is no look back period to receive this array of benefits, Frank.
Yeah, and we thought it was kind of good to kind of just set the stage of where we are kind of in the process. So once you're approved for Medicaid, you have to enroll into one of many Medicaid programs. So we kind of bundle the first set kind of together when we talk about managed long-term care, where you can either go under the personal care services program, going through an agency, or you can choose for your consumer directed personal assistance program, which we're going to talk about all today with our guests. You don't always have to go under the MLTC umbrella. You could go to a waiver, whether that's the nursing home transition diversion waiver, the TBI waiver, and for certain people in geographic areas, you could potentially enroll also in the PACE program. So again, there are just many Medicaid programs. This is something that we spend a lot of time with clients on, figuring out what program is the best for that particular client in that particular situation. But today we're going to focus all on that consumer-directed personal assistance bullet.
Suffice it to say that New York's Medicaid home care program is complicated.
Just a little.
It has a lot of subtleties to it, nuances. You have to know which program to target. And what we have seen over my career, my 41 years practicing law and doing elder law, is in the beginning a very stable workforce coming from home health agencies and an ability to staff cases through these other programs without much of a hardship. Today, we have a very scant workforce in terms of home health care relative to the need. The need is a graph going in one direction. The availability of home health aides is going in a different direction. And so we see licensed home health agencies going out of business. We see the inability of agencies to staff certain cases. And when we get to remote areas, and our firm practices all the way up to the Canadian border and all the way down to Manhattan, it's a very different environment in New York City than it is in Plattsburgh, New York, trying to find a home health aide. So when people can't get satisfaction through a home health agency, they have to turn to another program, Frank, which is given this ability to staff with people you find on your own.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a few, I think, important points about when we talk about why this is such a needed program. One of them is to fill in these gaps when agencies or other places that people used to go to find care just don't have the resources available or the people available. The other big thing that we talk about with clients about why CDPAP may be appropriate is because since you can hire and fire your own people, clearly you have more choice over who's in someone's house providing care, but you also have a lot more freedom as to what services they provide. So we've had cases in the past where there might be a more complicated physical case, like somebody with a trach or a catheter or something like that, where just where a home aide might not be able to service such a case, but if you go under the consumer directed program, your aide can be more specialized and they can handle such care as long as you can train them appropriately.
So going back to the Olmsted decision and the ability of people to receive care in the most independent setting possible, and all the talk about servicing that marketplace in the home and allowing people independence, freedom, and choice, this is what the consumer directed program is. It is self-direction, an ability for families to take charge of the home care and to build a staff on their own, hire people that they are able to find, and then have a state payroll and an ability to regulate that payroll and put the hours through a state system, which was done by a number of different intermediaries. So informed choices, having guardians, sometimes necessary, but in many cases not, because it's a family member, a power of attorney, who can be the person directing the care. And this is something, Frank, that we've done successfully with clients, including my relatives, over the years. And it is the only way in some areas of New York State that you can put together a care plan and a staff that's going to service someone for 8, 12, 24 hours a day and have a steady ability to do that. When people can't find the care, they go to something called the gray market. And the gray market is people who get hired who are not part of an agency, who are not licensed, who are not regulated, who many of our clients are paying under the table. It's just a reality of the situation. And half the time clients come to us seeking help with Medicaid, they already have people that they've hired.
Yeah, I mean, we talk all the time about wanting to get out in front of the need for care, but plenty of times families, they're already in the thick of everything. They've already got their care arrangement kind of at least decided, or at least getting there where they already have a stable of people. And when we ask, how are you paying for them? It's not uncommon. They'll say, oh, we're just handing them a check or we're taking cash out of the account. Everyone's fine with it. And then obviously then we have to kind of see where Medicaid fits into that whole puzzle.
And the good solution is the people that they've already hired can be converted to the consumer directed program and get some training and be part of the state's payroll system so that they're not going out and doing things without workers' compensation, without unemployment insurance, without all the things that an employer would have to do in a home care setting. So this is a big issue that no one really talks about, but consumer directed is the way that we get our clients to be legal, if you will, and to have a payroll and a system where all of those things are taken care of by a group of fiscal intermediaries. And we're very happy today to have the executive director of the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Association of New York State, Bryan O'Malley. Good morning, Bryan, or good afternoon, I should say.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
And Bryan, we gave our little spiel on why we think consumer directed is such an essential part of the overall landscape of home health care, in particular Medicaid home health care in New York State. We're going to turn the controls over to you at this point and allow you to take us through the current state of play with regard to the consumer directed program.
Sounds great. Thank you, Lou. Thanks, Frank. Thanks for that intro and really kind of giving the base level of understanding about CDPAP. I just have a couple of the key terms that I defined real quickly here. You all did a great job of defining Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, or CDPAP, just to define my acronyms before I use them in some instances. When we say consumer, we're talking about the person who's receiving the services in CDPAP. The personal assistant, or PA, is the worker. And did I lose my slide? I lost my slide control, I think.
Says you're controlling, but
Designated representative, that is that individual, or can be a legal guardian, it can be another relative, and can be a friend and neighbor who is self-directing services for the consumer when the consumer is either not capable or just doesn't want to be that person, doesn't want that control. And the fiscal intermediary is that agency that the consumer works with, who's going to be paying the PAs, as well as providing that workers' compensation, any benefits that the PAs may have, and every other piece that does make that worker legal, as y'all so eloquently said before. Over the course of the summer, and even going back into last spring and late winter, we started to hear a lot of myths and facts, or we started to hear a lot of myths, I would say, that we're trying to continually promote the facts on. Governor Hochul, the Assembly, and their efforts to kind of demonize this program to pave the way for moving to a single FI really look to mischaracterize it, as well as those who use it, those who run it, in a number of very detrimental ways. I think the one we have all seen most over the course of the last few months is that this program is full of fraud. And they'll often cite anecdotal evidence. I think, the unfortunate part of Medicaid or any large program is we can find anecdotal evidence of fraud anywhere. I think it is telling that for the past, when they went back for fraud, they had to go back 4 years to find an evidence of fraud. But if you look at reports from state agencies who are tasked with overseeing fraud, they'll repeatedly find that CDPAP is among one of the programs that has the lowest amounts of fraud of any large Medicaid program. And that's whether you take it relative to the amount of spending or not. So realistically, we don't see the fraud. We have asked the state to point to the fraud, and they routinely can't. They just continue to make the same baseless claims that there is lots of fraud. But in reality, to say that there is fraud in this program, you are saying the workers are actively choosing, in many instances, to not provide services to family, to not provide services to their loved ones, parents, close friends, which doesn't, I don't think any of us would find ourselves in that situation where we're going to choose a $17 paycheck over making sure that mom gets the care she needs to live a high quality life. And it's difficult to assume why someone else would when we wouldn't. We also see just the myth that the program is growing too fast because of bad actors who aren't enrolling people who don't need services. But FIs don't enroll people. FIs don't make determinations about eligibility, and FIs don't create that plan of care. Lou, Frank, y'all did an excellent job in highlighting that it is the managed care plans who come up with that plan of care. It is the New York State independent assessor who determines whether or not someone is eligible for the program to begin with, and it's the counties or DOH that establishes Medicaid eligibility. None of that is the FI. They provide the services.
The independent physicians.
And
because there's an independent physician in the process, and the whole NIA process now is 4 to 6 months of screening and assessments and different things that have to happen before there is an award of hours. And that process isn't any different for CDPAP than it is for anything else.
Right. And the reality is we have an aging population in the state. And that aging population is increasingly poor, which means they increasingly qualify for Medicaid. And a lot of folks who choose to stay in New York as they age stay here because they need the home care services and other services we offer, or else they come back from other states once they do need those services. So that's the real reason why the program's growing. We also hear there are too many FIs, so the state needs to cut down the number of agencies. What we know is FIs exist to serve different populations. Choice and competition improve services for everyone. We have seen that in our data over the years that growing choice of FIs has resulted in lower times it takes to process workers. It's resulted in better payroll numbers. It's resulted in higher wages and better benefits. We also know that those FIs serve different populations. They hit niche populations based on disability, culture, language, and the like. And so really the high number of FIs does meet a need that is out there and drive a lot of that competition. Now, we do not want any bad actors, and we would say the state should take steps to make sure the FIs out there are acting according to the rules. But other than that, it is the rules of the marketplace that should really define which agencies are out there, which agencies are thriving, and which are not. So just kind of where we are in this current political and policy scheme. During the budget, the state shifted to one statewide fiscal intermediary. That was not a policy that was originally in the governor's budget. It was not in the Assembly or Senate's budget. It surfaced very late in the process and was really put in the budget with no conversation. It was a last minute addition to the budget, and in order to qualify, the law said that the entity had to be able to provide statewide fiscal intermediary services, which made sense. They had to be able to meet the cultural and language requirements, which again would make sense. They would have to experience serving people with disabilities, which again with the program makes sense. But the last one was where it got confusing to us, because essentially it said you had to have you had to have experience operating statewide in any state not named New York, which to us, it seemed like, if you're going with one statewide entity, an entity that had operated statewide in New York would seemingly be the best indicator of whether or not they're qualified to operate in New York. Wyoming is beautiful. It has a number of great aspects to it, but it doesn't really look a lot like New York. So that is where they moved during the budget. We ran a campaign over the course of the summer, as well as the early fall, to really push back against a lot of this. But in that budget, you saw the contracting laws were not withstood. For those who don't speak budget language, that meant all of the contracting laws for the state did not apply, including comptroller review of the contract. That is one of the most basic fundamental aspects of transparency and good government that there is. The comptroller just looks at the contract and says, was this done above board? Was this done in compliance with all of our laws and the like? Was this done without interference, political interference, or otherwise? They exempted that. And the impact of that was what we saw after the fact when the awards were given out. We heard of one vendor who were disqualified because they used a subsidiary, even though the state never said it cannot be a subsidiary, even though the state clarified that subsidiaries were affiliated to the corporation in exclusion for other purposes. Here, for the purposes of inclusion, they determined that the subsidiary corporation was not established to the main corporation. Another vendor was disqualified because they didn't submit a form that was required, even though that form was submitted and they had a time and date stamped copy of it. Now, the problem here is these are both easily refutable if you have a comptroller review process. If the normal processes of an RFP were to apply, these companies could have easily challenged this. But because there is no comptroller review, because this process was lacked any transparency, there is no actual process for these companies to go back and challenge the award in any meaningful way, even though they were wrongfully excluded. Trying to move my slide here. There we are. And they were excluded for an award to Public Partnerships LLC. This is a formerly Georgia-based company that apparently will be moving to the state of New York as part of this proposal. These moves of national headquarters typically take months and months of negotiation and are the subject of a lot of conversation between an administration and a company. If that conversation took place, that would seemingly violate a lot of the RFP laws that are in effect, and even those that were not exempted. It would violate the blackout periods where the state is not allowed to talk to any of the bidders about potential benefits or incentives that would be included. But what we do know is PPL has been removed or lost contracts in multiple states, including Colorado, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania specifically, reports found that prior to the state's move to PPL, 20,000 people had been using Pennsylvania's self-direction program. And afterwards, as of today, there are about 8,000 using the program. That is about a 2/3 reduction in the number of people using the program. People who fell through the cracks, fell through the canyons, one might say. And in New York, where we are dealing with 250 or 280,000 people, depending on the timeline that you're looking at, that would mean a minimum of 160,000 people who are using CDPAP today who would fall through the cracks and lose their services. This is not people going a couple weeks without care. This is people falling off of the program seemingly permanently. There were another 20,000 home care workers who went unpaid during this window. And in fact, there remains several years later a class action lawsuit claiming systemic wage theft by PPL for failure to pay overtime to workers across the state of Pennsylvania. In fact, a report from the Pennsylvania Attorney General cited that mismanagement of the program of the transition by PPL actually cost the state $7 million more per year. And that is, again, at a much, much smaller program. So as we...
Bryan, just for our audience, we have about 5 minutes left of presentation. And if you're okay, we have a lot of questions. It's been very active in the chat. So we will take questions for as long as you are available to take questions, if that's okay.
Perfect. I am here. I booked out till 1 o'clock just in case this ran over. So I am good to take questions. And I'm actually almost done. I just want to kind of cover for folks. Folks may have heard about subcontractors. There has been a lot of news that at least 4 agencies were named as subcontractors. These entities, it's important to know, these entities are not fiscal intermediaries. They're not going to be the agency that handles all of the consumers' payroll. They will not handle the electronic time check services known as electronic visit verification or EVV. They will not handle onboarding workers or benefits or the like. Every consumer, every worker will still need to move to PPL. These subcontractors, who will be potentially independent living centers, if they come to an agreement with PPL, as well as at least one FI per rate setting region, will perform services that are generally looking at support of the individual. They, again, legally barred from setting wages or benefits. They are legally barred from contracting with the plans or determining the EVV system. The consumers must switch to PPL. The workers will have to switch over their pieces to PPL. This means workers will lose any benefits. They will lose any accrued time that they have in the system. Everything will reset to zero. In some instances, there will be wage cuts, and everyone will work for PPL, and the consumer will have to move to PPL. There's a good amount of opposition that has come up against this. We have been working as our on our 501c4 side, consumer directed action. There are a number of elected officials, including the entire New York GOP congressional delegation, who wrote to CMS. 49 state senators on a bipartisan basis wrote to CMS as well. 31 state assembly members and 15 New York City council members. Really, government at every level on a bipartisan basis has been opposed to this. Senator Gustavo Rivera introduced bipartisan legislation, co-sponsored by now 13 of his colleagues, I think, to reform the licensing of fiscal intermediaries, which is something we have been promoting and supporting back to 2012, actually, which, notably had been vetoed by the Department of Health and Governor on at least one occasion. And as I said, advocates, agencies, consumers, and others came together under the umbrella of the Alliance to Protect Home Care to really defend CDPA and oppose the switch to that singular fiscal intermediary.
Bryan, there was litigation, I understand, that was started. Can you comment on that? What happened with that litigation and where it stands?
Sure. There are actually several lawsuits. One of the lawsuits, the only one that has been in court to this day, was rejected. The preliminary injunction was rejected at the Supreme Court level. For those not familiar with New York court systems, that's the lowest level of courts in New York. Actually, on Friday, one judge heard it at the appellate division, the middle level. It was referred to a panel on an expedited time frame. And so the appellate division will be hearing that preliminary injunction hearing in the very near future. We should have a decision by middle to end of November there. There are also at least 2 other cases that have been filed in state and or federal court. And I'm not as up to speed on the status of those. They're filed by groups not working as closely with us. So I'm trying to pay attention, but neither of those have actually been heard yet. They are in the briefing process.
Thank you.
I do want to just make sure consumers know you don't need to do anything today. Consumers, stay with your FI. If you would like to move FI for any particular reason, you are able to, but you do not need to change your FI. You do not need to change over to licensed home care services. All of your services remain the same. I would wait if and when you do hear something, you can always reach out to CDPAANYS, your managed care plan, others to make sure that information is accurate, correct. Double check every piece of information you hear now. There's a lot of information going around with different degrees of accuracy, I will say. So just make sure, unfortunately, the due diligence is falling on consumers because of the degree of information. You can always check our website at cdpaanys.org we try to keep it up to date with the most timely information there.
Before we get to questions, I just want to let our viewers know that next month is, if we can stay there for one moment. Next month, we have Rebecca Prevey, who is the head of the Area Association on Aging, Agencies on Aging. And Becky, if you go to our Elder Law Forum, has been a speaker there and has been a star. And she and Greg Olson have innovated a lot of the care in New York. So she's going to come in and talk about, it's Medicaid Monday, but it is non-Medicaid Monday for this month, because we're going to be talking about all of the services that are available in New York State outside of the Medicaid program. So the Office for Aging in each county has an extensive array of services. Becky's going to talk about those and also talk about the fiscal challenges ongoing because they face budget cuts as well in this session. And we're happy to have Becky with us, and I hope you can all join us for that. It will be an excellent and informative 30 minutes with Becky.